in looking at how this idea of the crucifixion applies to our modern world, we ended the last segment talking about communism, and it seems like within communism, the seeds of its downfall are kind of contained, and that's this discovery of the idea that this conflict of the haves and the have-nots can be extended to everything. And so the thing that you start to see is that if we're the haves and the have-nots, and we're gonna rectify the situation by getting rid of all of the haves. The problem is that within the group of have-nots that remain, there's further distinctions of haves and have-nots within that group, right? And you can atomize this down to the smallest. Your mustache is more lush than mine. Your eyebrows look better. You know what I'm saying? Like
everything becomes a source of division.
Right. If the answer cannot be get rid of the people who are the haves, or get rid of the people who are the have-nots, because that distinction is endlessly applicable. Jesus lays down a different idea here, and that idea is the idea of sacrificing the self for unity in community. How does that address this failing of the communist system? And it's not that we're necessarily picking on communism here, but this idea of let's say justice that the communist system portrays is really the only other viable system. It doesn't have to go under the name communism. It mutates endlessly. So how does the sacrifice of Jesus address this failing point?
Jesus' answer is that we both should be seeking each other's good.
Mm-hmm.
His solution is that you should be generous and I shouldn't be envious.
Right.
And in both of those, I should be seeking your good and you should be seeking mine. And obviously we get this in the Old Testament as well with love your neighbor as yourself.
Mm-hmm.
As kind of the second commandment. And it seems like Jesus takes that even a step further in the New. But his sacrifice kind of establishes that from the top that he's going to institute this, and it's more than just a model, but obviously Jesus is a model for us, but it's more than that.
Yeah. And the problem that I see is that it's said that the communist revolution never ends. Why is that?
I mean, you always create a new set of haves and have-nots, and you look at the USSR and stuff like this, and it wasn't ever a utopia, and it just created a whole new system of people who were the haves, who were kind of the ins and the political elites, and still a whole slew of have-nots, and also, as you pointed out, is you can apply this in every area, not just economics, and you're never going to have equality across every metric. It's just impossible. There's too much variation just naturally, and so you can always find another reason to be divided.
Yeah, and I think that so we either face endless division and endless conflict, or we decide that sacrificing the other person is not the answer to this, and yet if these divisions of have and have not remain, then we have a problem. And so the idea here is that you sacrifice yourself, and now does that mean just giving everybody everything until we're equal?
No, definitely not means. But again, it's this idea of seeking someone's good, and I'd like to say that just divvying things out equally from the rich to the poor is in everybody's best interest, and unfortunately, I found that seeking someone's good is much more difficult than I ever thought it was.
In looking at the world's answer is erase the distinctions, and then we'll all be fine. But it seems to me that the answer of the kingdom of God is no, you're not going to erase the distinctions, you're going to celebrate the distinctions. Now, that seems counterintuitive, but why might that be a better answer in the long run?
Well, I think say you take a corporation or something like this. If everybody in a corporation has exactly the same skill set, then that corporation is going to be very limited on what it can actually do. But the strength of a corporation or a sports team or whatever is in the diversity of what each member can bring. And as a collective whole, when they can all bring a different skill set to achieve something far greater, that's the advantage there. And the same, we're likened to a body and having different members that accomplish a united whole, so to speak. But it's only because we have these different traits, different abilities, that makes that possible.
Now, some would argue that we're just setting up a different kind of tyranny, and the tyranny that we're setting up is, instead of the have-nots serving the haves, we're just flipping that around, and now the haves serve the have-nots. But it's still a tyranny. That's not exactly accurate. Now, what's wrong with that criticism?
And I can see the point, and but there's something, if you looked at this in a family unit, I don't think we'd look at this and say, well, if mom and dad are serving the kids, the haves are serving the have-nots. What tyranny? And don't get me wrong, there's times where you feel a little bit tyrannized as a parent and things of the sort. However, it is quite the benefit to you as a parent to invest and serve in some way your children and things of the sort. And I think in the same regard, a ruler who destroys his kingdom in order to rule it is at a far greater disadvantage than the ruler who blesses his kingdom in the process. Who's leading a better kingdom?
Right. And it seems to me that there's also a failure to understand the distinction of, we could say that I'm serving my children, and that wouldn't be exactly wrong, but it might be more accurate to say I'm serving the family. And the role of everybody in the family is to serve the family. There's something new that's created in this, and that new entity is a spiritual entity. I'm not serving my kids as if they can give me orders, right? And so how does this distinction played out in the life of Jesus, and then how does that affect our future and our service and the idea of tyranny and freedom?
It's interesting that Jesus, being eternally God, as we see at the beginning of John, and yet still offering perfect submission to the Father throughout his life, and it gives us pause if we think that somehow we're going to make it to the top of some hierarchy and not be in a place of submission. But it makes submission beautiful is partly it, but also vital. And as men, in the grand sense, as humans, we often really buck at any kind of authority, and obviously that's something we can learn when we're young, something we can learn when we're old. But I think it's part of the fall, is that we want to shirk off all authority. I think Adam and Eve were under the authority of God, and kind of, well, should we be under his authority? And I think there's this natural penchant for it, but Jesus shows there's a great blessing in it as well.